There are several sugyas associated with Masachet Sukka in the third parak that are Shas sugyas. That is to say, that appear in many different places, many different guises. We're learning basic principles of how the halachic system works. Invaluable keys to the castle, I would argue. Tonight, we're going to start learning a little bit about the concept of Baal Tosif. Most of our learning tonight, most of it will be on the screen. So I hope your screen is available. What we're gearing up towards, just so you know, is the Tosfot on page 31a. Dibur HaMatchil V'ri Savar L'Makshinan Lulav. No, not that one. Made a mistake. We did that one already. Yeah. Where am I? No, hold on. No, hold on. 31B, I meant to say. I just went back to what we did last time. Hoil, the lights in my house just flickered. That's not a good omen. Not a good sign. Okay. Oh, yeah. Maybe the energy that I'm generating from my excitement. 31B, Dibur Matril, Hoil v'Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Lulav Tzarech Eged, Yimai Temina Achrina, Hai. That Tosfot is incredibly complicated. You have to learn at least two other Gemaras in order to understand what's going on in it. One of the strangest things about how Shas in the Rum printing works is that Rashi is the easiest, most accessible commentary of them all, and he's on one side of the page, and the other side of the same page each time are the Bali Tosfot, who among the Rishonim are oftentimes the most complicated, the most challenging to understand, because they're, instead of, for all that Rashi is almost always, not always, but almost always localized, explaining what do these words mean, and it's by no means a simple feat. Tosfot is cross-referencing throughout Shas and trying to reconcile seeming contradictions between different points in Shas. So whereas Rashi does more, I'm oversimplifying, but mostly, Rashi is involved in translation, understanding what's on the page, maybe explaining a background concept in an incredibly terse manner. The Bali Tosfot are engaged in dialectical analysis. There's a thesis, there's an antithesis from another Gemara that contradicts whatever the thesis is in this Gemara, and then the synthesis where the Bali Tosfot are trying to reconcile the two. And so often, one of the foils for the Bali Tosfot is in fact Rashi, because the Bali Tosfot are, as far as Rabbeinu Tam is concerned, genetically descended of Rashi, and many of the Bali Tosfot, being from the school that they are, learned from Rashi. And his Perush, it became sort of the text or the thesis and part of the basic understanding of the Gemara, which the Bali Tosfot are challenging. Now, why do I bring all this up? What we're going to study tonight is the topic, the sugya of Baal Tosif. What I want to show you is from the Psukim of the Torah, and then tracing it through some aspect of the halachic system, even an application, of course, to the concept as it pertains to Lulav HaGazul. We won't get all the way to Lulav HaGazul tonight, to this parak, but of course, Big Adol, Baal Tosif means adding on extraneous elements that somehow wrecks the mitzvah. I have to understand better what that means. And it refers in this case, and that's where Tosfot is engaging it in the Gemara, about what would happen if you took some other substance. It's actually a Mishnah on page 36b, Lamed Vav Lamed Bet. If you took another substance and you used it to make the eged, the bundle, in order to hold the species of the lulav bundle together, would that be Baal Tosif? Machloket between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Do you have to be made out of the material of a lulav in order to be staying on the right side of the scorecard and not go over into Baal Tosif, adding extraneous elements? It's been pointed out already, and I left it as a hanging question. Art had asked this question via email, and others had posed it to me in passing. What if you're holding your cell phone with your you have your bundle and your etrog, and you can't tear yourself away, God forbid, so you're holding your cell phone in the bundle. Is your cell phone one of the elements? What if you have a piece of gold that you want to wrap around it to hold it together? It looks very nice. Can you do that? What about a metallic holder on the outside? Or you want to wrap fabric around it, or it's COVID and you decide you're going to wear gloves, but are the gloves that's interposition questions? Is it chotzeitz? But also, is it in some way, in addition to being a chatzitza, is it maybe part of the elements? What if you want to hold a bundle of roses together with your lulav and etrog that you're delivering to a friend? So that's not related to the Daled Minim. Well, does it matter if it's organic or inorganic? Is it anything in your hand? Is a sitter in that category? How far does it go? And would it be a violation altogether? So that's sort of in the distance. We won't parse that question tonight. What I'm trying to do, and I have no idea if I'll be successful, granted it's somewhat ambitious, go from the psukim, see some of the Rishonim, to trace it through the halachic system in order to have more of a conceptual framework of what is going on. So let's get started. First things first with the psukim themselves. I put them up on the screen and they're right here, and I'll enlarge it. 2 times does the Torah tell us about the mitzvah of Baal Tosif. It appears twice in the Torah inside of a few prakim of each other. Twice in Sefer Dvarim. We have in the 4th chapter, and then we have again in the 13th chapter. It's the end of chapter 12, beginning of chapter 13. So we're going to see those psukim now. So in chapter 4, both chapter 4 and chapter 13, Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to the Jewish people. This is his last lecture, if you will, of course, starting in Chodesh Shvat and spanning, I'll move myself over here, and spanning all the way into the time period when he dies, according to the tradition, is the 7th of Adar. So here he's speaking. It's one of the talks in Parak Daled. V'ata Yisrael shmai lachukim v'mishpatim asher nochim elamed etchem la'asot l'man tichiu uvatim v'rishtem et ha'aretz asher Shmuel Elokei avotechem notein lachem. And now Israel, hearken to, it doesn't mean to hear auditory, but to understand the edicts, the statutes that I am teaching you to do, to fulfill and act, so that you will live, you will be able to come to possess the land which Hashem, the God of your forefathers, is giving to you. Lo tosifu hadavar asher anochi metzaveh etchem v'lo tigra'u mimenu. Do not add to it and do not detract or subtract from it. Lishmor et mitzvot Hashem Elokeichem asher anochi metzaveh etchem, in order to guard, preserve the mitzvah of Hashem, your God, which I, Moshe, am commanding to you. That's one series of psukim. Here are the second psukim. And we do not care, in Judaism, we do not care one whit for the numerical value of the chapter number. I've mentioned this many times. Tanakh here, it's foisted upon us owing to the polemics of the Middle Ages. It is not a Jewish thing, and therefore that categorization system is bunk for us. We care about parshiot, stumot, and ptuchot, where the little letter pei appears in Sefer Torah. Well, not Sefer Torah, the Chumash, excuse me, which would bespeak a carriage return. You press enter to the next paragraph, or where a samach appears in a Chumash, which means that in a Sefer Torah, it's a tab space of 9 characters that are left open. That's the paragraphing we recognize. So when Hashem will cause the nations to be cut off where you're going, that you will have possessed them or inherited them, taken them away from you, you will inherit their and take possession of their land. You will dwell in their land. You'll be there. Be careful. Do not become ensnared by following after them after you've destroyed them from being in front of you, and do not seek their gods, saying, how do they, even as a curiosity, how do they engage in their idolatry? I'll do this too. I'll emulate the ways of. So like I'm in Canaan, I'll do it with the ways of the Canaanites. Absolutely not. Moshe is reminding the people. And this is on the heels of series of psukim that describes the destruction of Avodah Zarah in the land of Israel, etc. So lo ta'aseh l'Hashem Elokecha. Do not do this with regard to God. Ki chol to'avat Hashem asher saneh asu le'Elohim. All measure of abominations that God hates, basically. That's what they did to their gods. Ki gam b'neihem v'et b'notem yisrefu va'esh le'Elohim. They burned their sons and their daughters in fire for their gods. Eight kol hadavar asher nochim etzaveh etchem oto tishmru la'asot lo tosef alav v'lo tigra mimenu. Don't add and don't subtract. Almost the same words here, up here in the plural, here in the singular. Is there a difference there, a distinction? According to some of the Rishonim and Achronim, there is. I'll just note that according to Rashi, in 2 places, it seems like he says almost the same thing. Lo tosifu. His example is, don't make 5 parshas of the tefillin. Don't put 5 minim in the lulav. That's us. Don't make 5 tzitziot. Where 5 tzitziot means 5 strands. That would cause it to be 10 instead of what we have, 8. Let's say, B'chein, lo tigru, and don't detract. You may not tamper with the mitzvahs to downgrade either. Down here as well, on this pasuk, kol davar, all of the matters that I am commanding you to do, to hearken or to preserve, in order to fulfill, to do, perform. Do not add upon it and do not detract from it. Rashi at kol davar kal kechamura. Doesn't matter if it seems light or stringent, same thing, must not be tampered with. All right. Tishmeru la'asot litain lo taseh aseh amurim b'parsha, even to add a prohibition upon the positive mitzvot that are mentioned in the parsha. Shekol hishamer lashon lo ta'asehu ela she'ein lokin al hishamer shel aseh. So anytime it says hishamer, give me a second, George. I saw you raise your hand. Guard yourself, which is in the negative. We're not going to get a hishamer if the hishamer word is about some positive element. And it has to do with malkut. Don't transpose it onto types of mitzvot that don't actually have these punishments hiding behind them. Basically, about malkut. So that's a hishar melacha, lest you become ensnared after them, etc. Give me one more second, George. This last Rashi is really why I came. Lo tosif alav chamisha totafot v'tefillin. Chamisha minim belulav. There you have it again. But here he added in something else, 4 brach and birkat kohanim. So the Kohen says Yivarechecha, Yair, and Yisa, and then decides to add a 4th line. No can do. And what we will see shortly, well, let me not say what we will see shortly. Let's pause here. George, please ask.
So quick question. Is there a relationship, I'm assuming there is, for Zehadavar, and which is in this week's parsha a couple times, and Eit Kol Hadavar? Or to like here?
Yes, there is, but not related to our subject enough that I want to go into the distinction between those two, only because Zehadavar doesn't appear in either parsha having to do with Baal Tosif. It's true, Eit Kol Hadavar does appear. Rashi explained, Kala Kechamura, seemingly lenient items and more stringent items or aspects of halacha. If you don't mind, I'm taking a pass because Zehadavar has a particular connotation. If you look at Rashi at the beginning of Parshat Matot, that's really, to my recollection, the headquarters of the definition of Zehadavar and what it signifies. At the beginning of Parshat Matot, if I'm not mistaken, is where Rashi describes what that means. It means something specific. More so.
Okay, thanks. I'll check it out.
Yeah, worth checking out. And if you look it up and I just made that up, then you can by all means call me or text me, and I'll be embarrassed and I'll answer the phone and have to sheepishly admit that I made it up. I'm pretty positive it's the beginning of Mato. Not 100% sure, but
Rabbi.
Yeah, please.
A quick, if you lower it just a little bit, the text.
Oh, you want to put it back on? Yeah, sorry.
I want to, because you raised the issue that it was in the plural on top and in the singular on the bottom, lo tosef.
Yeah.
If you read that same pasuk that starts with Aleph at the very bottom, et kol hadavar asher ni metzaveh etchem, it appears in plural. And it really should be all in plural again. So obviously there is a reason for it.
Oh, for sure.
We'll hear about it later on from you.
Yes. Well, I don't know if we'll get that far tonight, but maybe. But yes, my point was the Torah doesn't. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't inside of 10 prakim decide, I'm just going to say the same thing again. I'm pointing out there's already a distinction, lo tosifu and lo tosef, lo tigreu and lo tigra, and we'll see soon that some of the Rishonim and Achronim, we may get there tonight, I'm not sure. There's a lot to see. Showed a distinction between these two. I'm going to allude to it in a few minutes. Let's look first at the Ramban al HaTorah, which is an incredible repository, not only of Parshanuta Mikra, of commentary, but also, quite frankly, of halacha. And the Ramban, we get a lot of halachic material from our understanding of all the Rishonim, but the Ramban will fill out a sugya in a way that, let's say, Rashi, owing to his terseness, will not mention. In fact, when you look at Rashi, I'm sorry to make everyone dizzy. I'm trying to do that too much tonight. You have Rashi here and Rashi here. If you have here Chamesh Parshiot B'Tfilin, this is Chamisha Totafot B'Tfilin. So that's a little linguistic challenge. They're both about tefillin. They both mention 5 species of the lulav, but this is still talking about an object of mitzvah. And this down here is talking about the words spoken in the performance of a mitzvah. This one has a voice down here. Yeah. But up here, it's just an object. It says 5 tzitziot because really our tzitziot, which have 8 strands, is really 4 that are right folded through the hole in the baguette. Yeah. The hatalat tzitzit goes actually through there. Okay. Let's go to the Ramban. He quotes Rashi. This is the one on Perek Daled. V'kach amar b'sifri. This is also we have in the Medrash Halacha, Parshat Re'eh. For those who are uninitiated, or just to refresh your memory, we think that only books written in the time period of Chazal are the Mishnah, and then the commentary in the Mishnah called the Gemara. This is incorrect. As anyone who learns Gemara knows, you're quoting Braitas. A Braita is any text that didn't make it into the officially redacted version of the sages of the Mishnah, called the Mishnah. And it also encompasses the whole realm, the whole era of Chazal encompasses Midrashim that were Midrashay Halacha, the organization of halachic material by Parshat HaShavua, as opposed to Shas, which is topical. This is thematic to the Parshat HaShavua. We do not have a Medrash Halacha on Sefer Bereshit. There's not much halacha to speak of from the era of Chazal. We have the Mechilta on Sefer Shmot. There are 2 versions of it written by 2 separate Tanaim, the Mechilta of Rabbi Shmuel and the Mechilta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We have the Torah Kohanim, also known as the Sifra. And then we have the works of, for Bamidbar and for Dvarim, the Sifri and the Sifrei. So something's called Sifrei because to try to differentiate between the one that's for Bamidbar and Dvarim, but generally the last 2, because they are relatively speaking, they sort of a unit, as opposed to Torah Kohanim, which is also called Sifra, which is a unit in and of itself. So this is on the one on Parshat Re'eh. What does it say there? You could get that sefer, by the way. I have on my shelf the commentary of the Netziv on the Sifrei for Bamidbar and Dvarim, and you have people who wrote commentaries throughout the ages on the Mechilta and on the Torah Kohanim as well. So here we have Minayin shelo tosif ala lulav ala tzitz Talmud lomar lo tosifu, don't add. Minayin shein pochtim hem Talmud lomar lo tigreu. So it bears it out. Minayin shein patach levarach berkat kolim lo yomar hoil upatachti levarach. Since I started blessing already, Omar, I'll also add a beautiful pasuk. Hashem Elokeinu v'techem Yosef aleichem. A pasuk from Parshat Dvarim.
Dvarim, yeah.
Talmud lomar hadavar. George, you still with me? Hadavar. I'm not getting the distinction between zadavar and hadavar, but here's the eight kol hadavar. So that's what hadavar means. Afilo davar lo tosef alav. It means even words should not be added. Ramban basically just explained to us why here eight kol hadavar is in this pasuk, and then it's here that Rashi on this pasuk chose to give us the information about Birkat Kohanim. Because in the Sifrei, it actually says that the 2 of these are linked to each other from the words dahadavar. This word, same word, is meant to reflect the idea that even extra words, if it's a word-related mitzvah, a spoken mitzvah rather, one may not tamper with it. Aval. Lo be'ela bilvad amru ela af hayashin b'sukkah b'shmini b'kavanat loka. Even a person who chooses to sleep in the sukkah on the 8th day, remember Sukkot is only 7 days. That person, if they did it on purpose, deliberately, they should get lashed. As it describes in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Chav Chet Amud Bet, im yaseh hachag shisha over b'lav hazeh. Also, if you made Sukkot only 6 days, you would be over on this lav. So the lav goes by adding to it or by detracting from it. This is just basic. Now the Ramban goes into the next phase of this. Ulefi da'ati, according to what I hold, afilu, even, bada la'asot mitzvah b'fnei atzma. If you decided you wanted to make up a mitzvah on your own, you're not adding to an existing mitzvah, you're adding to the mitzvot of the Torah, the number of mitzvot of the Torah, by making something like kigon sha'asachag b'chodesh shebada milibo kirav am. You want to make a new yontif. I'm not talking about a day that you're just going to stay stam. Today we're going to say it's an important, auspicious day. I'm talking about you want to make a yontif. People are going to light candles and Isser Malacha, and you're going to tell them they have to come to a temple and offer sacrifices. That's what Yeravam ben Nevat basically did. So that is, he's over, he violates this Isser Bal Tosif. Over Balav, that would be included as well. The Kach Amru, so it says, and now you already have a Dvar Torah for Purim, over a month in advance. Le'inin Mikra Megillah. What does it say? Meo Shmonim Neviim, 180 prophets, Amdul Em Yisrael. And from all of these, Lo Pachtu, Lo Hosifu, Amma Shekatuv Batorah, Afilo Ot Achat. Nobody was willing to add even a letter. No one changed anything. They didn't detract nor add. Chutz Mimikra Megillah. There's only one thing that was added. What's that? Mikra Megillah. This is a big problem. If we say now to add, how could there be an extra holiday where we're going to say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam v'shekh Shem Tzvanu al Mikra Megillah? It's added. It wasn't original. You can't just go about adding it. So the Gemara goes into a whole discussion. My Darush starts to figure out how do we know this, v'chule, etc. It goes into a whole excursus to understand how it's actually sourced somehow in Psukim, in the Torah, in the Nevi'im, in the Ketuvim. Have to have some kind of anchor somewhere to justify it. In the Yerushalmi, we have Shmona v'chamish Zakanim, Umehem Kama Nevi'im, Ha'umitztarim al Davar. There were 85 elders and prophets among them who were really in a state of consternation about this Amru. Katuv, it says in the Torah, the last pasuk of Sefer Vayikra, Eila hamitzvot asher tziva Hashem et Moshe. These are the mitzvahs that Hashem commanded Moshe. Eila hamitzvot shnitztavu mipi Moshe. That's what Moshe commanded. So this is what Moshe was telling us. Ve'ein navi acher atid l'chadish davar lachem. So Moshe was conveying. No one else will ever arrive who will tell us now new material, new information. Yeah. Okay. So
the case of Yerabam ben Nebat was not adding a new festival. All he was doing was to postpone it from the 7th month to the 8th month. But as far as I could tell, the appurtenances of the Hal was retained. So it's a little bit different than saying you're adding or subtracting from it.
Yeah, okay, agreed. As opposed to, it's not, you see, according to what you're saying, it wasn't an actual, a new holiday out of whole cloth, in as much as it was pushing off Sukkot, right?
Right.
Okay, except, and it's not for now, it's really a Sefer Malachim discussion. He had a different religious worship center.
Right.
And as far as Chazal are concerned, he invented the whole thing.
Okay.
But you're right. He patterned it after something else.
More
of a question for what's it called? You're right that it is more of a question for the realm of Purim, because that has no analog.
Right.
No analog. So Inach Hinami. Okay. All right. So by the way, if you're interested in the pasuk that Yosef Aleichem Kachem Elef Pa'amim Vivarech Etchem Kasher Diber Lachem, that pasuk, it's Sefer Dvarim Perek Aleph pasuk Yud Aleph. Right at the beginning. Okay. Moving right along. So back over here. Mordechai and Esther are bringing us something new, and we're not going to do this. We're not going to accept it. Lo zazu misham. This is Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi. Lo zazu misham nosim v'notim b'davar ad shehir HaKadosh Baruch Hu einayim. Till Hashem, as it were, enlightened their eyes that they could discover Ktov Zot Zikaron Basefer. They could source it somehow as a hint that there was going to be some continuation. And Benny, to your point, continuation of the war against Amalek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they sourced it in that. It was not going to be permitted to them. Yeah. Right. So that should be part of lo tosif. Okay. Elish lo lamdu l'mosif al pinavi elamin hakatuv she'amar el hamitzvot ein navi rashai l'chadesh bo davar me'ata. Right. So the idea about not adding to the words of the Navi, that is actually not from Bal Tosif. That's from this pasuk. I gave it to you here from the end of Sefer Vayikra, which the Gemara Masechet Yuma and elsewhere in Shas Darshans, it explains Ela Mitzvot, She'ein Navi Rasha L'Chadesh Davar Me'ata no Navi has license to make something novel up anymore. Yeah. So what the Ramban is saying here is the Chachamim and Nevi'im who overlapped with the story of Purim were really in a quandary because they could not just come around to add something in. So they figured out that really it was anchored in the Torah. They had to. That was through some kind of, call it divine inspiration. There was sort of like highlighted, if you will, to them, Ktov Zot, the words from Parshat HaShavua. And I have a Dvar Torah for Parshat HaShavua. At the end of Parshat B'Shalach, the war with Amalek. And what does Hashem tell Moshe? Ktov Zot Zikaron Basefer. Ktov Zot Zikaron Basefer, 4 words. Darshan this way and that, variously understood to explain the underpinning of why it is that we have a holiday called Purim. By the by, what the Ramban is also saying here is that the issue for them was that a Navi is not allowed to make up new things. But he is mentioning that the issue here, even though he starts off, I'll read the sentence again. Hari shahaita mitzvah zu asura lahem. This mitzvah was prohibited to them, i.e., of just deciding to add a new holiday. In Cain, he bichlalo tosif alav. It should be in the category of lot bal tosif, of do not add to the Torah. El shlolamad lamos val pinavi. But the issue is when we're talking about something that's added owing to prophecy, that is something that comes from the pasuk at the end of Sefer Vayikra, known by the 2 words Ela mitzvot, right down here, which teaches us, the Gemara tells us, a Navi cannot make up new things. But anything that the Chachamim enacted as a fence, a protection on the Torah, kigon shniot la'arayot, expanded level of relationships that's prohibited as being a prohibited relationship beyond the specific list in the Torah in Sefer Vayikra and Perek Yudchet, uchiyotze behen. So you know what? When they do that, that's not acting as prophets. Zuhi mitzvah min haTorah. That's a biblical mitzvah from the Torah that they are engaged in. Ubilvad sheida shehem mishum hageder hazeh ve'inu pi HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah. And this is the key line. The Ramban makes a distinction. He says, don't think that every time the Chachamim get up and make some kind of an enactment, that they are somehow adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah. No. There's already a mitzvah in the Torah that gives them, the Chachamim, the license to make these enactments. It's in chapter 17 of the book of Dvarim, right? Not to veer away from the words of the sages. But it has to be clear that they're not claiming prophecy when they say these things. They're not saying, we had a prophecy and it told us this. But rather, it's not from the mouth of God. It's what we came up with. It's our enactment. And that's a crucial distinction for the Ramban. If it's going to be something that is related to a book of the Bible, one of the 24 books of the Bible, of the Tanakh, is actually Megillat Esther. So that already has something. It's not a book of Nevuah, but it is a book that's written up Ruach HaKodesh. How do you put it in the canon and consider it part of a written tradition? There, they needed a pasuk to anchor it in. And indeed, as the Gemara itself notes, it is an exceptional circumstance that the Chachamim did this, and there's no parallel before or after. By the way, this is what differentiates it from Hanukkah. There's no book on Hanukkah. There's minhagim, there's mitzvahs that were enacted by the Chachamim. They didn't claim it was somehow prophecy. Okay? Now, they didn't claim that, by the way, with regard to Megillat Esther, but they did claim that it was written up Ruach HaKodesh, and therefore she's writing and petitioning them, Ki tvuni ledorot, include me in the canon, etc. Okay? So all this was just the baseline to get to see a little bit of the story. Now we go, as they say, a little bit, I don't know, I guess a little deeper to try to get into this in a little more of a sophisticated manner. Again, just to understand what is and what isn't Baal Tosif, is we have to try to justify and understand how could it be the Chachamim ever make an enactment? Isn't that Baal Tosif? So here is the Rambam. No, that's not the Rambam. Let's try that again. Take 2. I gave you a wedding checklist for a wedding I'm officiating, God willing. Okay, here we are. Here's the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim, Sefer Shovdim Perek Bet, foundational. The Rambam writes, Hoil v'yesh lebeitin ligzor v'lesor davar hamutar v'yamod isur ledorot. Since the beitin has the power to decree, to forbid that which is permitted, and its a prohibition can stand for all generations. V'chen yesh lem lahatir isirei Torah lefisha. They can even abrogate mitzvahs in the Torah, even prohibitions in the Torah, as a temporary measure. Mahu zeh shehizira Torah lo tosef alav lo tigram imenu. Then what does the Torah mean when it said don't add and don't subtract? The Chaim are doing exactly that. Shalohosif al divrei Torah v'lo ligro mehen. Right. So what it means is don't add to the words of Torah specifically. Do not detract from them. And here's the key word: v'likboa hadavar leolam shehu min Torah. Right. Don't decide to fix this as being permanent and claiming that it's from the Torah, whether bein Torah shebichtav, bein b'Torah shebal peh. He gives an example of how this might be. Ketzad, what's an example? Writes the Rambam. Harei katuv b'Torah lo tavashel gdiba chalev imo. Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. When we piyas shmua lamdu, we learn mipiyas shmua means from our understanding, basically from Har Sinai. Lamdu, they learned, Shezeh katuv asar levashev le'echol basar b'chalav. We can't eat meat and milk together, nor can we cook the two together. We can't cook it and then eat it together. Bein basar behema, bein basar chaya, whether it's behema, oxen, whatever it is, cattle, livestock, etc., or whether it's a wild animal. Aval, basar of mutter b'chalav min Torah. It is permissible to eat fowl and milk together from the Torah's perspective. Im yavo beitin v'yatir basar chaya b'chalav harei zegoreya. A beitin cannot stand up and abrogate an actual mitzvah in the Torah. It says in the Torah not to do this. We have a received tradition that when it says it about cooking a kid in its mother's milk, it is to remind us that a kid in its mother's milk, any animal in its mother's milk, or in any milk, and any animal that's a kosher animal, etc. But if you decided you wanted to abrogate part of it, that would be a violation of Bal Tigra, not to detract from the Torah. Now, here's the key. V'im yasar basar ha'of v'yomar shu bichlal hagdi v'u'asar min haTorah harei ze mosif. A person who will come forward, a Beit Din will come forward and claim that it is a Torah prohibition to eat fowl and milk together, chicken and milk, that is a violation of Bal Tosif, according to the Rambam. Aval, but im amar basar ha'of mutter min haTorah v'anu ne'asoroto. But if the Chachamim will come and say, from the Torah's perspective, it's permissible, we have made it forbidden. V'nodia la'am shehu gzeira shelo yavo min hadavar churva, and we will explain to everyone this is a decree so that we will not come to destruction, i.e., people will eat fowl and milk together, and fowl needs to be shechted. Pretty soon they'll be eating milk and meat together. We don't want it to happen, so they put a safeguard in. V'yomru basar of mutter mipnei shlonit parish b'Torah. Just as basar of is permissible for us to eat with milk, because the Torah didn't explicitly use an example of fowl, so too they will extrapolate kachachaya mutaret shaharei lonit parsha. Never said a chaya, a gedi as a kid. It's from the world of tzon, of livestock, but it's not a wild animal. So people will come to an erroneous conclusion. They'll say, just as it is permitted from the Torah's perspective, and in fact we do, they might argue, have license to eat chicken and milk together, pretty soon they'll be eating venison and milk together. But the venison and milk, that's already a prohibition, deoraita. Came the Chachamim, they outlawed the eating of fowl and dairy. No one can stand up today and claim they're going to follow the shita, by the way, of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, one of the Tanoim in his town. If you went to his town, you could go to their local KFC and get a piece of cheese on it, no problem. But he was voted out, not voted out as a human being, but that shita was not accepted. In the end, the preponderance of the Chachamim in that generation said already, no way. They did not accept it, and this became the halacha psuka. But if anyone will stand up and say, really, it's asur min haTorah, that's Bal Tosif, because you've elevated something that the Chachamim themselves enacted to a Torah level law. That's what Bal Tosif is, according to the Rambam. V'yavo echad lomar, and another person will come, using this example, had the Chachamim not outlawed fowl and milk, then someone else will show up and say, oh, even basar behema mutar chutz min ha'ez. When it said don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, it meant only goats. But cows, no problem. Oh, that would be bad. V'yavo acher lomar af basar ha'ez mutar b'chalav hapara o akivsa. Maybe someone else will then extrapolate. Again, he's just following the logic to reductio ad absurdum. Someone will say only goat, only the basar of a goat, but really the basar of a goat would be permitted in the milk of a cow or of a lamb. Because it says imo, his mother, means it has to be his min, his species. V'yavo acher lomar af b'chalav ha'ez she'ena imo mutar. It said his mother, so if it's not actually his mother, it's permissible. Shalom Namar Ella Imo. It only says his mother. Lefichach. Therefore, Ne'asor kol basar b'chalav v'afilu basar of. Therefore, the Chachamim decided, they enacted, full stop, that they prohibited all meat with dairy, inclusive of the fowl, of chicken and turkey, etc., duck, whatever else you want to put in that category. And Ein Zeh Mosif Ella Osis Siag LaTorah. It's adding a guard rail to the Torah. It is not actually adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah. V'chein kol kiyotze b'zeh. That is the Rambam's view. So to recap, Rashi gave us just an interpretation that had to do with most of the examples were objects. You added to the physical object in front of you. That is Baal Tosif. He gave us one example taken from the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Chet Amud Bet, where the Kohen decided to ad-lib extra brachas during Birkat Kohanim. No go. The Ramban was analyzing Rashi, telling us the source, basically, in the Medrash Halacha. The Ramban says Baal Tosif would include an individual who decides to make up a holiday. And the Ramban has to answer for, what are we going to do about Purim? Well, Purim, that's why it was such a problem. And Purim, they needed psukim in order to justify that actually it had some kind of a hint, a source, a hidden source, if you will, already in the Torah from Parshat B'Shalach. But further, the Ramban says that this issue is really not truly, when it has to do with claiming that it's somehow from a divine source, that truly is not from the Baal Tosif category of problems, but from Ein Navi Rashai L'Chadesh Davar Me'at, from the words Eila HaMitzvot at the end of Sefer Vayikra. Okay, all of this that we've done tonight so far, completely, totally, and utterly, this is just like the baseline. Is everyone with me? So go to the next step. Yes, ask now if you have questions.
Do we have similar concerns about Hanukkah or private fast days, or
for sure,
or any of the other things that we say special prayers on that we're not in Torah?
Yes. The question is, and that's why Hanukkah is actually the headquarters. The Gemara Masachet Shabbat on Chav Gimel has the question: how do you say the bracha Asher Kiddushan Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu L'Hadlik Ner Shel Chanukah? The Gemara itself asks, Heichan Tzivanu? Where's the mitzvah to light the Hanukkah candles? Right. So it gives you two answers. Answer number one and answer number two are both appeals to authority or tradition, but neither makes a claim that Hanukkah is therefore a mitzvah from the Torah. So answer number one is that the Torah tells us the sages can enact new rabbinic level mitzvahs. And the second answer is, which is the idea that there is a Masorah that comes, we're commanded, as it were, by the previous generations, i.e. the sages of previous generations. So one is a juridical appeal, an appeal to the juridical element. And the second give me 1 second. And the second one is to precedents, you could say, all the previous generations. That's why it's a Asher Kiddushan B'Mitzvotav V'Tzivanu. God sanctifies through the mitzvahs and he commanded us. What's the mitzvah? It's not the mitzvah of Hanukkah. It's the mitzvah of listen to what the Chachamim tell you. But here's the crucial distinction. When it comes to Purim, there's actually something going on with Purim, that there is a book, and the book is written al pi ruach hakodesh, and there's a campaign. It is a campaign. It's Megillah Daf Zion, I think, that they're pushing. We put it in. And there's some resistance to doing that. And that's why Purim is sui generis in its own category. Fast days, they're in their own category. The idea of a fast day already has its roots in the Torah. The question of when it's going to be, that's already something that comes up by Nevi'im. Let's say that the fast days for for the Churban Yerushalayim, right? Sar B'Tevet, Shavaz B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, Tzom Gedai, they're all related to the destruction. So that's already baked in. Obviously, Yom Kippur doesn't count because Yom Kippur is in the Torah, it actually says,
Yeah.
right? But they came to us through Nevuah, right? But they're not new mitzvahs. They're an expression of, at a time of trouble, the Torah describes in Bamidbar in Parshat Ba'alotcha, that you could have a time period that's a time period of trial. In that case, happens to be war, but right, we have already a tradition about these things. The question of when it's going to get applied, so that comes later. But Purim is in its own category because it makes a claim. Number one, to having a book that's going to go into Tanakh. That's not a prophecy book; it's a Ruach HaKodesh book. That's why it's not in Nevi'im; it's in Ketuvim. Number one. Number two, it doesn't rise on the force of the Chachamim on their own through their own erudition and logic of we'll just make up a holiday rabbinically. It's actually connected to something in Tanakh.
Yeah, I got it. And that's we also don't include the book of Maccabee in the Tanakh.
Maccabees doesn't make it in the canon at all. Right.
Right.
That is not a book that we claim that book is not written up Ruach HaKodesh. It's written in a style. It's fan fiction, I think you'd call it. I mean, I'm not saying it's fictitious. I'm saying, so you have a style, and it's a style of biblical writing. So some guy decides, I'm just going to write a book, but the Chachamim never accepted it. It wasn't even it was never even on the
discussed
What?
to put it in the canon. It was not like the Sefer Yechezkel. There was a big debate about that.
There are a bunch of Svarim. Yechezkel, Kohelet. There are several Svarim. Shir HaShirim. There are discussions about those books. There isn't a discussion about Maccabees. Anyway, Bert and then Larry. Bert, go ahead.
And going back to Basar meat or chicken.
Yeah.
When in Chumash, where the people are complaining, give me meat, we need meat, Hashem says, okay, you want meat? We'll give you meat, and it's fowl that he delivers, right? It's going to be coming out of your nose.
Yeah, right.
It seems derisa that fowl is meat.
You're making a very good point. Worthy of discussion in that sugya. Let's say that for the purposes from a halachic vantage point, the understanding of a Torah Sheba'al Peh of what the prohibition L'tavashel Gediba Chalevimo means is it does not include fowl. You could argue it was obviously an expression of meat, and you'd be making a good case against, let's say, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who said, why can't you have milk and chicken? Like, what's the problem? Of b'chalav mutter. He actually held that. And you'd be making a good counter case, which is, well, when they asked for meat, God gave them quail. So is quail not part of fowl?
And he also said,
yeah, right. Ainli basar, and he told me, I hear it. So the simple answer, which there's much more to it, but the simple answer for tonight, to be able to move on with the sugya, is you are right. But the drasha that we have, that it comes to us as the official understanding. When I say official, I mean it's the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Masorah tells us. How do you understand the pasuk? Lo tavashel gediba chalevimo. It means you can't have any kind of son or bakar or a chaya mixed with milk, cooking together and then eating together, or even getting enjoyment from the two of them being fused together. That's just a given. And the Rambam is just saying, you might have logically wanted to say, hey, let's just include basar oaf. That's not part of the tradition. But it's also prohibited. Yes, but you need to keep the gradations of what's the oraita and what's the rabbanan. If you conflate them or confuse them in some way, you intermingle them, the net result will be chaos. That's Baal Tosif. That's for the Rambam. That's what it means. Okay. Larry, can I go over to you? Can't hear you. Larry, if you still want to ask, can you unmute? I'm going to move. Oh, there you are. Go ahead. Can you raise your volume? I don't hear you. I'm sorry.
Hear me better now?
Hardly. I can hardly hear you. I'm very sorry.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's something with the sound system. Might be on my end. I don't know. Okay.
It's here too.
Yeah. Oh, you have it also? Okay, maybe it's on Larry's end. I don't know. Okay. The Sefer HaChinuch, Parsha Re'eh, Mitzvah Tuf Nun Dalid 454. Not to add into the mitzvahs of the Torah. Here we are. We're prevented from adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah, Shebichtav, and not to the Torah Shebal Peh either. That's what it means, Lo Tosif Alav. Sefer HaChinuch, a Rishon, oftentimes hews the line of the Rambam. Here it's a little bit off, but pretty close. V'ketzid Yeh HaTosefet, he quotes the Rambam. What is it? It's the same thing we just learned, right? No reason to reread it again. Same thing. He quotes them verbatim. We already saw that part. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, V'rube HaMefarshim Yomru, Lo Shayach Lo Tosif Klal El B'Mitzvah Aseh. Most of the commentators think that actually Baal Tosif only exists for positive mitzvahs, not for prohibitions. This is what I heard from my Rebbe. May God protect him. I can't tell you who that is because we don't exactly know who the author of the Sefer HaChinuch is. So it's kind of hard to know. Might be a student of the Rashba. Not clear. Well, he says, what I heard, the Sefer Chinuch, a rare occasion when he departs from the understanding of the Rambam. Remember, the Rambam said, Baal Tosif means you've added something and claimed that it was from the Torah when it really wasn't, right? You said the prohibition of eating chicken and milk is from the Torah. That's Baal Tosif. But the Sefer Chinuch says, that's not how most people understand it. In fact, how I learned it from my Rebbe is it's only on positive mitzvahs. You change the object of the mitzvah. You take 2 pairs of tefillin that are kosher. You put it on your head or on your arm. You have 5 boxes in the tefillin. You don't like 1 lulav, you take 2. And anything of that sort. You're sitting in the sukkah after Sukkot and you're thinking, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkot. It's not sukkahs anymore. You know that it's not sukkahs anymore. And deliberately, you go in and say, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkah because who's the Torah to tell me when I should sit in the Sukkah? I like it now in November better than in Chodesh Tishrei. So that's Baal Tosif. Shein over mishum Baal Tosif ela b'mechavein lasad ha-mitzvah. You have to have kavanah. You're trying to do the mitzvah at that time. V'chein hanota lulav achar hachag u'mechavein lasad b'ha-mitzvah im heyoto yodesh avar hachag. You knew that Yantav ended. Chag here is Sukkos, and you didn't care. And you're taking lulavim in your hand. So it is in the parak of Masachet Rosh Hashanah of Ra'u Beitin. Skipping. The Mesik Hatam, it says there, concludes there. Ela Amar Rava Latzeit Lo Bai Kavana Kolomar Shemitzvot Ein Tzrichot Kavana. The Gemara concludes you don't need kavana when you do a mitzvah. You're performing the mitzvah, and you know you're doing a mitzvah, but you don't have kavana to do that mitzvah. So okay, but Lavor Bismano Lo Bai Kavana. That's only if it's during the time that the mitzvah could be fulfilled. You don't really need kavana. Shelo Bisman, if it's not at the time of the mitzvah, you do need kavana. Okay? Now, everyone with me? So the Sefer Chinuch departed from the Rambam's understanding. He sees it as having to do with the mitzvah objects themselves that some have been tampered with. That's the issue. Okay. I got a question just now, but if it's okay, let me hold the question off till I finish this portion, and I'll dial back to it, okay, just so we get through this. Now, here's what the Sefer Chinuch writes next. It's important to note this. Aval anota lulav b'chag, afilu mea pa'amim b'yom, al dad latzit b'chol pam u'pam ein kan Baal Tosif. Baal Tosif, says the Sefer Chinuch, is not, if you pick up the lulav and you shake it, and you put it down, 10 minutes later you pick up the lulav and you shake it. I'm not saying you can say that. He's not saying you can say the bracha every time. The point is you could keep doing the same mitzvah again and again and again. You were told to do it once. You're doing it 100 times. That's not Baal Tosif. You want to blow the shofar over and over and over again on Rosh Hashanah. So that's not Baal Tosif. Im aga iged imo min pasul aliba de hilchata the kamilan ein tzarich eged she'ein kamishum Baal Tosif. And it goes without saying, he says, if you took a lulav that was not kosher, or if you took a the eged that you wrapped around it. You used some other. You used again from a rose. You took the stem of a rose and you somehow intertwined it around. He says, I don't think that is really going to be Baal Tosif, because he says in the end we follow not Rabbi Yehuda but the Rabbanan. Rabbanan say you do not need the eged, and if you don't need the eged, so if you wanted to put an eged, that's on you. No one thinks it's one of the species because it's just not part of the bundle. Doesn't count. It's a zero. So zeu klal advarim be'inyan iser zeh shehelu mori yeshom shehelu more yeshom b'divrei gemara achar yagia rabba. All right, so what they learned from parsing it out from the Gemara. Va'ata b'ni im tizkeh v'tochal yagia kapecha gam ata ashrecha v'tovlach. We're always reminded these little snippets where he throws in. And so, my son, if you will merit to eat the fruit of your hands, you will also have, be fortunate, and it'll be good for you. He's talking to his son. He wrote this book for his child, for Shabbos reading, Shabbos learning. Mishor sheh mitzvah. What's the root of this whole mitzvah about Tosif? Ki ha'adon ha'mitzava otanu al ha'torah baruch hu b'tachlit ha'shleimut. The master who commanded us regarding the Torah, may he be blessed, in completeness and wholeness, etc. Everything is incorporated thereof. Every commandment that he gave is complete and is good. Anybody who tries to add to them, chisaron, and especially if someone tries to detract, it's for sure, this is a clear matter. Okay? What he's basically saying here is the Torah is from Hashem, the Torah is perfect, and there's no reason to add anything to it. Now, don't misunderstand. The Sefer Chinuch is not arguing, therefore, we're done, and if it's not written in the Torah, that's it. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah is the Chachamim can enact mitzvah derabanan. They can make a siag la Torah, fence around the Torah, enactments, gzerot, etc. Right? So the source of that the teachings of Chazal are themselves with an authority. They're not the level of Deoraita, but they're with the authority of the Torah, is found in the 17th chapter of the book of Dvarim, right? That doesn't mean that they can make something Deoraita, but it does mean they can enact something Derabanan, as long as we keep the distinction of what is truly Deoraita and what is truly Derabanan. So the bracha, when we say, Asher Kishom Stav Vitzivanu, you have sanctified us sanctified us through his mitzvot, and he commanded us, we don't mean literally God commanded us. We mean the sages of the plenipotentiaries, if you will, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who are vested with the authority to enact such things in the system. They commanded us. I wouldn't have been clearer had it said Vitzivanu Harabanim. Yeah, maybe, but for whatever reason, that's not the syntax they chose. It's almost as if in the bracha format they wanted to elide the distinction, just in the subtlety of language, between mitzvah deoraita, asher kishom tzvanu al achilat matzah, and asher kishom tzvanu al achilat maror. The first one, bisman hazeh, is deoraita. The second one, bisman hazeh, is derabanan. That's just the reality. So,
how do you reconcile those who wear shelashi, tefillin shelashi?
This is another big discussion. The tefillin of Rashi are, let's say, the mainstream. There's a big discussion. How did it happen that his grandson came up with another order of the parshiot? It's another sugya of itself. So the other order is they call it tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam. And there is a discussion, in fact, about is it Baal Tosif to put on Rashi tefillin and then Rabbeinu Tam tefillin? The answer is no, because in both objects there are only 4 parshiot in the tefillin. The suffix is, what's the order of the parshiot? They're the same parshiot, but they're in a different sequence. What would be a question, though, is what if you wanted to put on 2 pairs of tefillin at exactly the same time? Would that be Baal Tosif? That's actually also a machloket, believe it or not. It is actually a machloket. Now, if you look with me, we go a little farther. We have the following. There's a Gemara in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, page 16, which has the famous line about why it is that we blow the shofar so many times in different guises. We blow shofar before Musaf, during Musaf, after Musaf. Yeah? So V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Lama Tokin Rosh Hashanah. Why do we blow shofar Rosh Hashanah? The Gemara recoils in horror. Lama tokin? Rahmana Amar Tik'u. I mean, what do you think? The Torah actually literally directly commands that you should blow shofar. So what do you mean? Why should we blow shofar? So you rephrase the question. Ella Lama Marian. Why do we have Trua? The Gemara again said, Marian Rahmana Amar. Zichron Trua. The Torah itself says Zichron Trua. It's pretty obvious. So third crack at it. Ella Lama Tokin and Marian Kshen Yoshvin. Why do we blow shofar when we're seated, meaning before the Amida? That's the basic understanding of it. And then the token of Marian Kshen Omdin when we're standing in the middle of Chazar Hashatz. Answers the Gemara, Kedila Arbev HaSatan, in order to confuse the Satan. All right, whatever that means. Who is the Satan? What is the Satan? Is this very strange? How does the Satan not know from year to year that we're fooling it? Okay, we'll leave that aside. But Rabbi Yitzchak here has just told us that we're going to blow several times extra, a bunch of times extra, many times extra, in order to fulfill some kind of idea of mixing up the Satan. Bali Tosif would say, wait a second, isn't that Baal Tosif? Tema, haka'avar mishum Baal Tosif. You just violated Baal Tosif right there. V'chi Tema, if you want to try to argue, Kevin Tkvar Yatza Havale Shalab Izmano, Delo Avar, if you want to argue that you blew shofar at the beginning, you were Yotze right in the midst of shofar, now this is just to confuse the Satan, so it's not Bismano anymore. So maybe you're not going to be over really. We learned in the Gemara Masechet Rosh Hashanah, page 28b, Gabe Birkat Kohanim, Dein Moshe Bracha Achat Mishalo. Right? So Bishum Dolo Avar Ale Zimne. Right? Kavan de Ilu Mitrame Leit Sibura Achrina Hadam Avarech Lahu. Achinami Imitrame Leit Sibura Hadar Taka Lahu. The Gemara, the Bali Tosfot would say, isn't it strange that Rabbi Yitzchak's claiming we should keep blowing shofar till you mix up the Satan? Isn't that Baal Tosif? You're doing the mitzvah again and again and again and again. So he says, and the Bali Tosfot would say, don't try to say to us, well, you fulfill the mitzvah, so this is like gravy, this is extra. Because there's a Gemara elsewhere in Masechet Rosh Hashanah that says, even after the Kohen has said the 3 lines of the bracha, Yevarechecha Ya'er Yisa, he may not add another bracha, a 4th line. You might want to argue, well, why not? He finished the mitzvah, done. Now he's just a nice guy. He wants to add in more mitzvahs. The Gemara there says that's not correct, because if another congregation were to run into the shul, or if he was walking down the street and they say to him, are you a Kohen? We need Birkas Kohanim, come in. The Zman, the time of the mitzvah, has not really ended. He'd have to do the mitzvah again. Therefore, even when he finished doing the brachas, he'd have to do the brachas again. The 3 brachas for Birkat Kohanim. Ergo, when he finishes the 3 lines, he must not say more brachot to the people, because it could happen later in the day he's going to have to do it again. Bali Tosfot would say the same thing is true with the shofar. He finished blowing shofar, you can't add extra. That is Baal Tosif. Because actually, if you're walking down the street and someone says, excuse me, do you blow shofar? Yes, my so-and-so is in my house and needs you to blow shofar. So you're going to go inside and blow shofar to be a shofar blowing of mitzvah. So now that extra blowing sounds like it is Baal Tosif. The Bali Tosfot answer it as follows. I'm here, V'yesh Lomar. And this is the key line right here. We saw it already elsewhere in the Sefer Achinuch, but now you're seeing it more in the source earlier in the Bali Tosfot. V'yesh Lomar, de'ein shayach Baal Tosif, ba'asiyat mitzvah achat shnei pa'amim. There's no such thing as Baal Tosif in doing the same mitzvah repeatedly. Kigon, Kohen mevarech v'choz mevarech otot tzibur atzmo. Let's say the Kohen gave the 3-line bracha, and then he gave them another 3-line bracha. The same 3 lines, but he did it again. Oh, he didn't add a new line, but he said the same thing. Oh, notel lulav, v'chozav and notel. He took a lulav, and then he took a lulav again. V'chein, tokeh v'chozav v'tokeh. V'gabei matnot b'chor nami im notin b'karen echad shtei pamim. Ein zabal tozuk. He gives an example also about the placing of the blood of the korban for the b'chor. So where if you did it like repeatedly in the same spot. Basically, what Bali Tosfot here are saying is that the world of Baal Tosif does not have to do with the repeated performance of the same action. It's only about somehow being involved maybe with the object. It doesn't really say here, but it's not about repeating the same process again and again. You follow? Therefore, extra times you're going to blow shofar. It's fine. You just heard the shofar extra times. It's not Baal Tosif. It's just filling the mitzvah and continuing to do it extra. That's what the Bali Tosfot say.
And do you say with or without bracha the second time and the third time?
Well, it would depend. If the kal was not yotze, let's say in the Birkat Kohanim, you'd say the bracha again. But still be yatsa motzi, so you could still help others to fulfill it. Yeah.
But the Birkat Kohanim is basically specifying it should be just these three lines. It says, Ko tebarchu et bnei Israel. This is the way you should bless bnei Israel, and goes on to list those three lines. So it doesn't, by adding another line, even
You would ruin
if you
it.
like to, you're actually violating that particular mitzvah.
But
It's
the
not
Bali
a question
yeah,
of
for
how you
sure.
see it.
Yeah, for sure. The Bali Tosfot are just saying, if you said Yivarecha, Yair, Yisa, and then you said again, Yivarecha, Yair, Yisa, that's not Bal Tosif. You just did it. What are you adding? It means adding other lines. But if you're saying the same line again, that's permissible.
Uh-huh.
Tosfot Arosh, and we'll finish with this tonight. We never saw the Rajba. We'll get there. It's for next week. V'tokin Marine Kshein Omdin. This is the Tosfot Harosh. So among the last of the Bali Tosfot, the Rosh writes the following: Tema haka avar mishum Bal Tosif. He's quoting from the regular Tosfot. Chitema came to the Kfar Yatza Hava. Sorry. Move this over. Havalik Shlobis Mandala Avar Hamrina. It's quoting the same thing. Same thing. Pretty much the same thing. He quotes the same answer. Bal Tosif Basiyat Mitzvah Achat Shnei Pa'amim. Same thing that the Bali Tosfot says. He's quoting it verbatim. Kigon, Kohenim Mevarech, V'chozim Mevarech, Afilu, Oto Tzibur Atzmo. The same, you could sell the same. A second time. Or you can pick up the lulav and pick it up again. Or you could blow the shofar and go back and blow it again. Or the giving of the blood, the placing of the blood on the side of the mizbech for the matnot bechor. Right? So he quotes that again. Now, says the Rosh, not in Tosfot, just in the Rosh. It has to be you added to the mitzvah. What are his examples? Objects. Kigon hitil lemutelet. You added another strand in the tzitzit. Oh, chamisha parsha betfillin. Added another parsha into the tefillin. Or shnei tefillin. Omid kavnin lahosif. And you added a second, a pair of tefillin. And your intention was to add to the previous mitzvah that you had there. The Rosh fills in the gap that what Tosfot meant to say also, and the Rosh is a reliable rapporteur of the words of the Bali Tosfot. He's from the end of the era of the Bali Tosfot. In his version, his Tosfot ended with, and by the way, what's Baal Tosif? It's not, as Tosfot had said, it is not the repetition of the mitzvah repeatedly, but it is the adding to the object of the mitzvah, the physical object of the mitzvah as such. We're out of time today, so we won't get to see the Rashba. If it's of help to you, I'm happy to send you the packet via email, and you can look it over yourself, both to review and also to get into. Here's the Rashba. We didn't get to the Pnei Yeshua I wanted to see, and then the Shiltei Giborim, but we'll have to leave that already for next time. That's all we have time for tonight. Hope you enjoyed. Again, I know we're so far off the daf, but I'm laying the groundwork to be able to delve into the Tosfot on Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, and knowing the basic concepts will help us now, and actually also on 36b when we get to that sugya, and it gives us a basic foundational understanding of how the halachic system functions, hopefully elucidating and clarifying. Okay.
Rabbi, just to clarify, Rabbi, just